I want to talk today on a subject which may well be on the minds of many of you here. It's something that we've been thinking a great deal about in the UK and Ireland. And this talk, just to be clear, is one which I've given at recent gatherings. We've met in Scotland, in Ireland, in York and in London, and we've connected with our pastors who brought their teams. So this talk, I've not added or subtracted from it. Okay, I thought it's been helpful for them, it was well appreciated, so I thought it might be similarly helpful for you. I want to talk about the subject of healthy leadership. How to lead in a way which is in accordance with the precious calling of pastoral ministry. And my hope is, as I talk about, as I talk and as you listen, in whatever area you're leading in, whether it's in a church, whether it is in some other area of life, or maybe if you're not currently leading at all, there will be some key things which hopefully will speak into your situation. So much of it will go over your head. Some of it I'm already aware is culturally probably not that relevant, but I'm still going to give it to you in case it's of use in an international context, because we're all living in an international world, instantly connected to what happens in America, etc. So I've left all the points in. Now, I don't speak as someone who's got everything right. I've made plenty of mistakes over the last 37 years in pastoral ministry, probably more mistakes than any of you here, because I've been doing this for a very long time. But rather, I speak as a fellow traveller on this road of following the Lord to the best of my ability in leading those that he has entrusted to our care. It seems over the last couple of years, every few months, or sometimes it feels like every few weeks, we become aware of another high-profile leader who is exposed for behavior which isn't appropriate, has hurt people, has brought disgrace on the reputation of God's people. I know many of the names. I have relationship with many of the people I keep reading about yet again in the press, having done something wrong. And in the UK, I've been quite intentional for the last couple of years teaching into this subject. And also we have produced little short articles from my teaching, which have been published every week for the last, 17 weeks or something. There's one or two more, I think, before the conference that we're hosting in a week's time. Just talking about little snippets of wisdom, hopefully. You'll find some in there. And you can access those through social media from Vineyard Church's Instagram or whatever, and they're also on the website. In fact, I'm such a Neanderthal when it comes to technology that on Instagram I thought, oh, that's interesting, How to Handle Money by John Wright. I thought, I wonder what I said about that. I'd be fascinated. And it says link in bio. It took me a while to find where the bio was. I clicked on every link there was. Eventually I went to Vineyard Churches, and then it came up with something else. And then there was National Vineyard Leadership Gathering plus 4 others or something. I'm like, anyway, in 4 minutes, I got through to at least the page where the article was supposed to be, but then I couldn't trace where that article related to the articles that were published on that page. So I went down to Debbie and said, look, I'm probably just so non-intuitive. You're incredibly intuitive. I bet you can't in 4 minutes find that article. 5 minutes later, we gave up. So we've never read that article, but some of you who are better at link in bio than we are, perhaps you could teach me. Maybe in the break, come and show me how on earth to get to the articles I wrote. As we've read reports of leaders not living up to the standards set out in the Bible, we've been reminded again to pay attention to keep watch over ourselves, keep watch over our character, keep watch over our conduct. As we consider character and gifting of leaders, it's worth taking a look at the criteria which the Apostle Paul lays out for us in passages such as 1 Timothy 3. I think John referred to that. And within that, some of the descriptive words fall into the category of describing character traits and attributes, and others fall into the character of describing the category of gifting. So let's just do a very quick exercise together. If you've got anything to write on, create just on your piece of paper 2 columns. Head 1 with the word character, head the second one with the word gifting. And as I just read this list, I want you to count how many are primarily described within character and how many would be primarily an issue of gifting. Okay? So character, just to be clear, are those qualities that you can make choices to grow in, like, say, being honest. Is that a description of gifting? No, it's actually a character trait, okay? And then gifting is really things which are more about skills. You either have that gift or you don't. So combining words from the New International Version and the Message translation, it says this: if anyone wants to provide leadership in the church, there are preconditions. A leader must be, and all you need to do is put a mark in one or the other column. A leader must be well thought of, committed to his wife or husband if they have one, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not given to drunkenness, not pushy, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. They must handle their own affairs well, attentive to their own children, and having their respect. They must not be a new believer. They must also have a good reputation with outsiders. So not being a new believer is neither a descriptor of character or gifting, but I think that arguably maybe the only thing in your left-hand column or your right-hand column about gifting, well, the only clear one is the ability to teach. Now, some of you may have got hospitality in that column. Some people have a gift of hospitality, don't they? They're especially gifted in that area. But cannot all of us choose to be hospitable? And therefore, I'd argue maybe even that fits into character. But at the end of the day, character and behaviors are very important. And whatever your particular role or area of oversight is, we need to pay attention to them to be healthy leaders. So much of that should be pretty clear on your columns. I hope it is. And if it isn't, go back and read the text yourself and just really critique it again. As Paul said to the elders in Ephesus in Acts chapter 20, keep watch over yourselves and all the flock of which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers. Be shepherds of the church of God, which he bought with his own blood. There is nothing more precious than God's blood, right? With his blood, Jesus purchased for God people from every tribe and language and people and nation. And therefore the church is the most precious thing in the universe. Those of us who are tasked with leading in the church have an awesome calling in every sense of that word. We've been entrusted to lead and to pastor and to take care of this incredibly precious entity that is the church. Just think for a moment how you might feel entrusting your most precious possession to someone else to take care of. Those of you who are parents might remember the first time you had somebody babysit for you. Do you remember how you felt as you took the most precious thing ever entrusted to you and you handed it over to another person and hoped the evening would go well? And really that's what God has done with us. Sometimes, of course, leading God's people can be challenging. That babysitting task can be really difficult, especially when the baby misbehaves. And sometimes, we're shepherds of God's flock, but sometimes sheep misbehave. Sometimes sheep even bite. The workload can seem overwhelming. There are difficult decisions to be made. There are difficult conversations to be had. People may criticize us. They may misunderstand us. We may be tempted at times to quit. But when we feel frustrated with the flock under our care, when leadership just seems too hard, it's crucial that we remember what a precious calling it is. As we consider how precious what we've been entrusted with is, it gives us a perspective which can shape how we conduct ourselves as leaders in a way which pleases God. Sometimes when the pressure of work gets on top of us, it's not the work itself that suffers, not initially at least. I think it's fair to say that leaders are often the kind of people who are probably quite capable in some areas, and they also probably take responsibility seriously. They take responsibility for the things they're responsible for. And so when the pressure of work gets on top of us, it's not the work initially that maybe suffers, but what can happen is that when that pressure mounts up, we focus on getting the work done, and we do everything we can to meet that deadline and set up that event, and then because no one else is helping, set that thing down again and recruit much needed team members and get that budget signed off, and all the things that you'll be responsible for, pick up the slack when others don't show up. And these things are to some extent good. We are committed to the cause and we're willing to pay a price. But underneath, it can be our own emotional and spiritual health that begins to suffer. And of course, eventually, the church or the area that we are leading in will suffer too. Some years ago, I got to a place of pretty close to burnout. And I felt utterly trapped by the work commitments that I had made, and I was just running on empty. And responsibility is in my top 3 strengths, and so I don't easily make commitments and then break them. And so I just had, my diary was just jammed with things. And I was in a restaurant with Debbie, a restaurant some of you will have sat in because it's just on the canal walk from the hotel, the Holiday Inn, I think it is, just by the canal there. And with Debbie and another couple of colleagues, and in the midst of our discussing over lunch yet another really, really complex and difficult work situation, I became so wound up that I could have snapped at any moment. And I said, count me out. I cannot deal with being involved in this. I am feeling so much emotion right now, I can hardly contain it. And I even said, if the waitress spills something on me, I will probably punch her. And I wasn't joking. I was absolutely on the very edge of being able to contain it. And that got their attention. And they said, wow, what is going on with you? And I said, look, I have more on than I can possibly handle, and I feel trapped. And they said, isn't there something you could cancel? And I said, no, I've gone through and I cannot let people down here. And what about delegate? I said, no, I've got to do these things. People are expecting of me. And I've committed to too many things and I cannot let people down. And they said, look, what can we take off you? And so they said, get your diary out right now at the table. And we looked together and they were able to spot something that somebody else could step into. It was an area gathering I was speaking at. And they said, look, we'll go and we'll take someone with us and we'll do that. And then they went back to church to deal with what for me was the final straw. And I walked down there and I sat by the canal and I poured out my heart to the Lord. I just cried and cried and cried. It wasn't just that I couldn't get the work done. It was taking a massive emotional toll on me. And of course, we have an enemy, the enemy of the church. The gates of hell will not prevail against the church, but spiritual opposition is a very real reality. If you were the enemy, what strategy might you use? Well, how about I'd like to scatter the sheep, strike the shepherd. The enemy is very aware, even when we are not very self-aware, and he studies us, and he sees our vulnerable places, and he waits, and he orchestrates events. Jesus was tempted to do something which would thwart his messianic calling. And Luke 4, we read that when the devil had finished all his tempting, he left him forever. No, he left him until an opportune time. And the key opportune time was in the Garden of Gethsemane, when the temptation to thwart his calling came back with a vengeance. Where there's an area of weakness which could be exploited to bring damage, Satan is waiting. He, like a prowling lion, a roaring lion, waiting for someone to devour. He's waiting for an opportune time. And as we keep watch over ourselves and our conduct in our life, we need to be aware it might be little compromises, a situation, a close relationship which becomes tempting, flirting this side of a line. And in a moment of isolation, tiredness, needing comfort, suddenly that person is there. Suddenly something we never imagined would be possible happens. So today I'm going to share some thoughts on how we might keep watch over ourselves by sharing some practical things which we can put in place so that we stand every chance of not just survival in leadership, but actually thriving. Now, as I talk about these practical things, I'm making the assumption that each of us here has a personal devotional life. We're spending time in prayer and in Bible study and so on. And so I'm not going to be expanding on that here. That's an assumption. However, in my limited observation, it seems that even many leaders who do apparently pray a lot and study the scriptures deeply don't end well when they don't pay attention to some of the things that I'll be talking about. Now, I'm not wanting to name anyone unnecessarily, but two people who most of you will be aware of illustrate this point. They're in the public domain already. Mike Bickle from International House of Prayer prayed more than almost anyone and apparently had a great passion for Jesus, that so much so he wrote an excellent book by that title. But it's recently emerged, as you're probably aware, that he has over a number of years been sexually involved outside of his marriage. Ravi Zacharias studied the Bible more than almost anyone and was among the most exemplary and brilliant writers, Bible teachers, and apologists. And it emerged that he had for many years been sexually involved and abusive to women outside of his marriage. So prayer and Bible study are essential for Christian leaders, but had those two men had a conversation with me and been at this talk today and taken it seriously, some of those things may not have happened. And so they may have finished well. You know, they may not have hurt the people that they brought disgrace on brought disgrace on the reputation of God's church in the sad ways that they did. So I'm just setting this up to okay, get your pens ready because I'm going to give you a few tips. Number one, work on your self-awareness. As we continue to watch over ourselves, the best place to start is to work on our self-awareness. The reality is, though we are aware of it or not, we all minister out of some degree of brokenness. We've all been adversely affected by past experiences. Many of us, all of us, have ways of being that are challenging or are not what we believe is God's best for us. D.L. Moody, the preacher and evangelist, was once asked which people gave him the most trouble. And he answered immediately, "I've had more trouble with D.L. Moody than any man alive." Jack Parr, an American author, radio and television presenter and film actor, once said, "Looking back, my life seems to be one long obstacle course, with me as the chief obstacle." Acknowledging that we are not perfect and becoming self-aware about the things that we may struggle with is a key to being healed up and becoming a more healthy leader as a result. I love Pete Scazzera's book. I was listening to him coincidentally on the airplane over here, an Audible thing, interview with him. His book, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, and there are a couple that go with it, Emotionally Healthy Leadership and Emotionally Healthy Churches. That book is worth reading if you haven't, and it's worth rereading if you have. Some good questions to ask ourselves could be, where might my vulnerabilities be? What are my blind spots? How do people experience me? Personality types, those psychometric tests and all that, I think they're helpful. There are a range of personality tests and strengths tests which we and those in our teams have engaged with over many years to different degrees, things like Myers-Briggs, StrengthsFinder, Working Genius, colors in different forms. DISC uses the colors as well as some other thing. And they're really helpful, not to excuse the way we carry ourselves in situations, but they do help to explain our strengths and weaknesses a bit and help us to choose a different behavior when a different behavior than what is natural to us would be best. As leaders, we need to be self-aware about our strengths, but to realize that for every strength we probably have a corresponding weakness, like almost that strength's shadow, a weakness within it. For instance, I am pretty task-focused. In the Strengths Finders test, achiever is in my top 3 strengths. Now, God has used that. There's nothing wrong with being an achiever. He's used that to achieve some key things in the kingdom. However, a weakness which kind of goes with that is that I'm very task-focused and not very people-sensitive. I'm not very empathetic. Now, I was confused about this because I am quite compassionate. And I talked to an expert on these things. He said they're related, but they're very different things. So I am pretty compassionate when I see people who are struggling, when I see people in pain, but I'm less likely to pick up on emotional dynamics when I'm focused on a task. So in a room, if we're tasked with achieving something, someone's just taken a phone call from someone, they've got a sick child and they're in tears in the corner. Unless they're in my eyesight, I have no idea whatsoever. I need empathetic people around me who will make up for that shortfall and ensure that empathy is raised to a high level within the team dynamic. We would do well to be aware of our strengths and weaknesses and how those closest to us experience us can provide valuable insights into that. If we have a spouse and children, they are the most important individuals God has entrusted to us. And however others might perceive us, ideally those closest to us should respect us the most. For some leaders, you may think of those furthest from them respected them the most. Those worked closely with them actually didn't. Close family members see us in our less guarded moments. You can't pretend for very long with close family. And so their reflections on how we behave, how we are experienced, are very important to listen to. If our spouse or closest friends observe that we are overbearing or demanding or selfish or excessively irritable or any other thing that we shouldn't be, we would do really well to listen to them carefully and do what we can to change. And ask ourselves, do we make it easy for them to give us feedback? Do we listen carefully, make it a safe place, thank them for their feedback? Or are we immediately defensive, self-justifying, and dismissive? Those for whom those last words would describe them don't get the feedback, and they generally don't change, and they generally don't finish well. Everyone in leadership will find different things challenging, but being self-aware is one way that we can keep watch over ourselves. Secondly, don't go it alone. Leadership, in whatever form that takes, whether this is inside the church or whether it's in some other area, can be lonely. It can feel isolating. In fact, this was the podcast with Pete Scazzero I was listening to on the airplane. It was about loneliness in leadership. I recommend it. There are times when you do need to lead in an unpopular direction, hopefully in response to the Lord's leading, but you might be in that time tempted to withdraw from others and just tough it out alone. There are times when you might be struggling with something and you don't have the emotional energy to connect with other people or be vulnerable with anybody. But isolating yourself is not good. By all means, get alone with the Lord for a time. But what I mean by isolating is, thank you so much. You've noticed I've been wiping my nose with my finger. That's very kind. Very kind indeed. Leadership can be demanding. It can be demanding on our time, our diary. It can be hard to imagine. How am I going to make space in the diary to be with other people beyond, the meetings which are already in my schedule? But we are designed as relational beings. It is vital that we have replenishing relationships. Just very broadly speaking, there are 3 kinds of relationships. There's some overlap, but basically there are draining relationships. That's where we primarily are giving out and receiving nothing back. And so a lot of pastoral ministry would include that. That's what you're pouring your life out for the sake of the sheep. That's what shepherds do. It's predominantly draining. Then there are neutral relationships where there's a bit of give and a bit of take maybe, but you don't come away built up. You just have have an interaction. Then there are replenishing relationships. And I really would encourage you, spend time with people who, like Hebrews 10 says, will be encouraging to you, will spur you on towards love and good deeds in your ministry. People you can be yourself with. Friends you can meet up with for a great time, have fun with. But don't even leave it there at that relatively shallow level. We also need friends we feel able to talk through some of our difficulties with, who we can be completely honest with, who we can fall apart in front of. When I was sat in that restaurant with Debbie and my 2 colleagues, absolutely overwhelmed, I was so grateful to have people I could be real with. If I hadn't opened up to others, I could have either done something I would have regretted, like lose my temper right then, or simply have just gone under. As it was, learning, when we go through hard times, let's learn from them. Stupid John, how did I get to a place where I could have punched a waitress? I should have been opening up far beyond that, before that. And so, note to self, just when the pressure's building, don't wait until the pressure cooker is about to explode. At some point, just say, I'm not doing well. Guys, can you just pray for me? Can I talk through what's going on? My diary is overwhelming. Is there anything? Learn from my mistakes. So if something is wrong, don't soldier on. That's an original poem and rhyme by John Wright here. You can take that, make that down. But if something is wrong, don't soldier on, ask for help. And whether it's something you're personally facing or a challenge in the church, reach out to someone. Take the initiative. Don't just sit by your phone hoping someone will call you. Take the initiative, reach out long before whatever you're dealing with is close to overwhelming. Remember, it's not the last straw that really is the thing that breaks the camel's back. It's the accumulation of all this straw that is already on there. And if you sense something's wrong, act early is my encouragement. And of course, there are a number of resources that are available to ensure that we don't have to go it alone. We've done our best in the UK movement to provide things. Some of you may have done some things like faith walking. It used to be called, it's now called Emotionally Focused. Or receiving ministry through small ministry teams. Some of you have heard of Sozo. You've probably got other things in your cultures. Debbie and I and a few others of our team, our national team, have spent 5 full days going through a ministry, like 3 hours of ministry every morning, 3 hours of homework in the afternoon, for 5 full days. It was called Restoring the Foundations, RTF. And I found it hugely helpful, first of all, in realizing that I was a lot more messed up than I thought I was. We had this opportunity to go to North Carolina, and Debbie said, we should sign up for this thing. I'm like, yeah, I'm sure you'd benefit from that. And I'm sure there'd be some, I'm overstating it, but it was like, yeah, I think I'm pretty sound. But yeah, if I can grow, if there's any resource, I'm sure that'd be great. But I got there, and within a day, I realized I'm really messed up. I'm carrying some beliefs from my younger years, some inner vows which are controlling the way I behave, which are not healthy. I've got some needs to be certain things, which are that's destructive. I don't need to be that. And so anyway, I had ministry and plenty of tears and all sorts of confession. All these things went on. It was a great time. Came out wrung out and exhausted at the end of 5 days, but. It really helped in identifying some of my broken areas and addressing them and praying through them and moving through them to a more healthy place. For the last 9 years, in fact, as we became national directors 8.5 years ago, we said we don't have the emotional or spiritual maturity to carry a large church and a large movement, and we need to be in the peak of openness to the Lord and healthy. And so we said we can only do it if the movement would fund for us a spiritual director and a psychotherapist. $75 a pop, and it's now every few months each, but initially it was more intense than that. And I think they figured out, well, we'd rather just pay a little bit of money to keep these people healthy. And who wants to follow a completely wrung out, exhausted, at the end of their tether leader? I think better to follow someone who's a little bit more healthy. And we just thought we cannot do it alone. So we have that spiritual director, psychotherapist, and every few months we have a Zoom call, sometimes jointly, sometimes alone. And with the spiritual director's help, we're able to process all sorts of struggles with him, with both of them actually. We're unedited. He's profoundly helped us to grow in our marriage, in our ministry, the psychotherapist and the spiritual director. And we've argued in front of the psychotherapist. We've broken down in tears together in front of the psychotherapist. But it's a safe place. He's on a Zoom screen. It's the weirdest thing. We were at a conference a couple of years ago in America. This guy comes up, "Hey, nice to meet you. So good to see you." It's like, whoa, I've seen you on the screen. Like, you're a safe place. You're just a face and shoulders. Multiple thousands of miles away. Now you're a human being holding my hand. You know stuff no one else knows about, my inner life. In a few seasons of challenge, we've also had access to a coach who has helped us to work to our strengths, make good decisions which could otherwise have been clouded by our blind spots. And, we're able to access support. Obviously, I'm talking about our own being resourced, but that may not be available, obviously, to you. But I would really encourage you to take what you can from this little bit I'm saying and find people who you can process with. People a little bit external to the detail of the situation. People you can be real with, people you can be totally honest with. Don't go it alone. Number 3, be approachable. I'm going to just fill, or someone perhaps could pass me the jug. Thank you. Thanks very much. Number 3, be approachable. Oops, if I put it there, it'll pour. Pope Francis, in an address in 2013, talked about pastoral ministry, and he said, "This is what I'm asking you. Be shepherds with the smell of sheep." In other words, be accessible to the last, the least, and the lost. As a movement, the Vineyard movement has benefited greatly from church growth models that became popular in the 1970s, 1980s. The study of church growth in the US was back then a new thing, which among others, John Wimber usefully had and insightfully taught on. Study of church growth. The insights gleaned from studying the factors which impede growth enabled leaders to dismantle unnecessary growth barriers, really facilitating them attracting and embracing greater numbers of people into the kingdom, into the church. But I do think that the concept of pastor, the understanding of what a pastor does, may have been negatively influenced by some interpretations of church growth teaching. Just my personal opinion, right? The reality was and is that a pastor can only really effectively and directly care for a congregation of up to around 80. And that helps explain why the vast majority of churches in the UK, anyway, I'm not sure in your context, don't grow much beyond that size. Even with a willingness then to share the pastoral work with another colleague, churches tend not to grow beyond a couple of hundred. In order for a church to grow much beyond that, it involves a mind shift. Essentially, I can't be there for every individual personally. My job is not to pastor everyone, but rather to ensure that everyone is pastored. That's the mind shift. So I need to give away the task of looking after many of the people directly and appoint leaders who will take responsibility for that. And that church growth teaching in the early 1980s suggested thinking in terms of moving from being a shepherd to becoming a rancher, from a little flock to running a ranch. Instead of pastors being there personally for the sheep, the rancher needed foremen to oversee the larger numbers now in the flock. And as the pastor delegated the care for those in their flock, he or she focused on being a leader who became something like a manager or a CEO of those foremen. Now, my personal view is that that shift was not supposed to be a shift from loving and deeply caring for individuals in the bride of Christ to accommodate more numbers. Of course, there are useful strategies to grow, and we want to facilitate all the growth that the Lord might bring, but not at the detriment of loving the church. And the danger is that we've taken the idea of being a rancher and somehow forgotten about being a shepherd, about caring for people. And we can think, well, if you're familiar with those colours, let the greens. You're familiar with what I mean? You got reds, blues, greens, Yellows are quickly like, reds would be very task-focused, blues would be very kind of details and logical in their thinking, greens would be very individual-focused, pastorally caring, and the yellows are just party people, very inspiring communicators, and they love people. So, but the greens, so some leaders think, well, let me just find myself in my notes. Yeah, let the greens, the kind of touchy-feely people, the individually focused people, around me, let them do the pastoring because I'm the leader. I'm like prophetic in my vision. I'm apostolic in my gifting. And something, but the calling of a pastor is to be a shepherd, to not only love the bride of Christ, but to be among the sheep, to smell of sheep. And this is true of anyone in leadership, regardless of your particular area. We all need to love the bride of Christ and to be approachable to those under our care. And in smaller churches, it's much easier to do this, but it doesn't mean, especially if you were leading a large church, that everyone can book an appointment to meet with you. That's not possible for us like at Trent. So we've tried to be strategic about who we've spent time with, and that has tended to be new people and also emerging leaders and then people who report to us a more senior level. But there are also non-strategic relationships that we have tried to maintain. So we'll have lunch with people, often from other cultures. We'll say yes to those sorts of invitations. We'll go hospital visits. We'll do certain things. We'll invest. One of the things I do is invest in people who don't fit into churches, like if their background is in crime and gangsterism. For whatever reason, I can't expand on. I'm comfortable with people like that. Not because I was ever in crime or gangsterism, but as a young man, I met people who were, and I felt very safe with them, and I still maintain relationships for decades with people who are the wrong side of the law. But that's really not strategic. And Debbie will sometimes say, how many more hours will you spend with that guy? I don't know. He is changing. He is changing. He's going in the right direction. It's like, this is not strategic, but it's part of being a pastor. So it's not all about strategy, but it is about caring for people. So we try to be accessible as we can, but especially on Sundays. And so the half hour before the service and after the service is such an important opportunity to hang out with people in the church and make yourself accessible. If you have a prayer meeting in that period of time, I'd encourage you to think about getting up earlier and having it before that, such that you can be present for that half an hour as people are arriving. Some people hold back from approaching senior leaders. The larger the church that gets, the more that's the case, because they perceive that he or she has got more important people probably to be speaking to. I try deliberately to find them. And there are occasions when I'm just wandering around through the crowd and I just feel prompted to just approach someone. It's probably easier for me than it is for them to approach me sometimes. And as I walked around the back one Sunday evening, you've got to bear in mind just the size. If you've been to the National Leaders Conference, the services are smaller than that, but nevertheless that's the feel. And so some people I don't speak to for a number of years because there are a lot of people. And I just walked around the back and I just felt prompted to go over to this guy, put my hand on his shoulder. I hadn't spoken to him for a couple of years. And as I put my hand on his shoulder, he looked up and he's like, wow, I felt the Lord say you would come over and talk to me tonight, and here you are. And as we spoke, I was able to encourage him. He was going through a really challenging season, and it was just a moment, So I might be talking with a homeless addict just sitting in the corner. People who others might not notice. I'm trying to be attuned to where's the Lord just leading. At a service, As you become entrusted with more people, don't lose sight of the one. As Andy Stanley put it, do for the one what you wish you could do for everybody. Number 4, step off the pedestal. People sometimes put leaders on pedestals. Now, I realize that in your cultures, this is much less of an issue than it would be in the US, possibly than the UK. But because we're all, as I say, much more internationally aware, and you're all seeing what's on social media about what goes on in other countries, I've left this point in. So it may not be relevant, but people can honor the office of leader and sometimes revere us in a way which could be unhelpfully flattering. A pedestal, you know what a pedestal is? It's a tall pillar-like stand on which statues or vases would stand on. Now, a pedestal, if you look at it, it's a pretty shaky place to be. On a pedestal, it's a pretty shaky place as a leader to be. And in the Vineyard, we value leaders who lead from a place of humility. That word humility comes from a root word from which we get the term humus or hummus, not the chickpea delicious dip. I'm talking about when a compost heap has had time to compost, it becomes hummus or humus, which is a rich soil for one's garden. So essentially, humility is about earthiness, being down to earth, thinking of ourselves as we should, not thinking of ourselves more highly than we ought, but neither thinking of ourselves any worse, just simply being down to earth. One of the greatest compliments I've been given by a church member in the past year was this. He said, "John, I mean no disrespect, but you're just a normal bloke. A great bloke, but just one of us." That's the greatest compliment I've received in the last year. It's vital that people know that we are human. We are human too. We are down to earth. We are people who are far from perfect. And leaders who will admit their failings while working on them, who will apologize when we've done something wrong or hurtful. A culture of honor, which particularly would be in the US, some people teaching into this, a culture of honor may be healthy if it includes honoring everyone. However, it can become unhealthy where the leader is the one looking to be honored while feeling the freedom to dishonor others. And sadly, this is an issue which we're seeing among some who expound that culture of honor teaching. Leadership is a special calling, no doubt, but we are not special people to be revered or treated differently. Whether in church or in some other area of life, my encouragement is to do what you can to step off whatever pedestal you might find building around you. And try not to put others on pedestals. Of course, we want to respect others with more experience and wisdom than us, recognize with leaders the burden that they carry, be kind to them. I'd encourage you, be nice to your leaders, but it can be unhelpful for them and us to put them on a pedestal, to perhaps think or expect more of them than is reasonable. Remembering and recognizing that leaders are human just like us and can make mistakes, realizing that can help us avoid disappointment and disillusionment. Number 5, stay gentle. In Paul's letter to the Philippians, he wrote, "Let your gentleness be evident to all." And in his letter to Titus 3:2, "Always be gentle toward everyone." It's fairly all-encompassing, really, isn't it? Always, towards everyone, be gentle. And this is, of course, applicable to all Christians, but I think it's especially important for leaders. And it's one of the criteria which in 1 Timothy we just looked at, Paul lists when appointing leaders: gentleness. Harsh leadership, bullying leadership is completely contrary to Christ-like leadership. I heard about a pastor recently in a phone conversation with someone he was really frustrated with. He conducted himself in a manner that was so harsh that this person was left absolutely in tears and had to go to their pastor to be consoled. Now, obviously not every conversation is going to be easy, and if a person took reasonable correction unreasonably hard, it may not be the fault of the person addressing that just because someone was in tears. But we don't ever want to find ourselves that in our frustration we failed to be gentle in our interaction. And we would do well to ask ourselves, how do I come across when I'm frustrated with anyone? I mention this next point not to make myself look good, but because someone close to me said I should say it, because it's so important in today's leadership culture. And that is this: that in the past 37 years, in the context of pastoral ministry, I've never raised my voice to anyone. I've been in situations, don't get me wrong, where people have made me cross. I've been frustrated and angry with people, and I've been frustrated and angry with situations. But I've managed not to let that anger spill out on people by behaving angrily towards them in my actions or in what I've said or in how I've said it. And even if we don't experience gentleness from some people, it's an important quality for us as leaders, all of us, to grow in. Part of remaining gentle is making it easy for people to disagree with you. It is somewhat inherent in leadership that some people may find it hard to do that. And it can take a lot of courage to approach a leader and express a view that you know the leader probably won't agree with. We need to encourage people to express their concerns, express their disagreements, and to create a climate of emotional safety for people to bring constructive criticism. When someone comes to us with criticism, how we can make it a safe experience for them is something that it says Debbie's going to talk about in the third session. She's not here and she's not going to be speaking, but this is because I took these notes directly from that learning community. Use authority with care. Number 6, use authority with care. George Bush Sr. prayed at the inaugural address of 1989, "For we are given power not to advance our own purpose, nor to make a great showroom for the world, nor a name. There is but one use of power, and it is to serve people." Remember that a leader's role is to shepherd the sheep, to serve the people, so we need to handle that authority with care. Now, authority is a good thing, commensurate with the responsibility that we carry in leadership. To have one without the other doesn't work. You need commensurate authority and responsibility matching. But as leaders, we need to be very aware that there are inevitably power dynamics at play. Different types of power dynamics going on. Positional, the position that any of us hold as senior leaders, that's a power dynamic. Reputational, especially if we've been doing a role, maybe doing it well and doing it for a very long time. There may be relational, perhaps you're very good with words, you're very quick, you're very persuasive. That's a power in an interaction. Maybe spiritual authority, you've got a kingdom authority because of something you've done in ministry. Maybe even physical power dynamics. Emmanuel Acho, he's a 6'2", 17 stone of muscle American football player. Fascinating, and I listen to a lot of his podcasts on race and all that sort of thing. Really fascinating. But I think it was him who said, when I have a conversation with someone, I'm aware his incredible presence physically is an immediate power dynamic, and so he would sit down to have a conversation so the other person remains standing sometimes to take that away. So just be aware what power might I have in this situation and how could I dismantle that and make it more of an even playing field. We need to be aware of the possibility of misuse of power and ask ourselves, how are we handling the authority which has been entrusted to us? People rightly submit to the authority of their leaders, but as Jesus said, far from lording it over others, we are to serve humbly. There's a danger that in order to get something done, even without realizing it, there's a temptation to resort to making use of the power dynamic we may have in a way that is not godly. There are ways to get people to do things through appropriate persuasion and vision casting, and there are inappropriate ways through our use of words, applying pressure, emotional manipulation, which can appear to get a similar result, but ultimately a misuse of the authority that God has given us. The greater your responsibility and authority in leadership, the more your whisper can be heard as a shout. Your words carry more weight than you think. You just said, I was just saying something assertively in that moment. Yeah, but if there's a power dynamic at play, those words can be heard with a lot more volume than you intended. So we would do well to be careful in our use of words and be aware of different ways they might be perceived depending on the type of authority which we carry. Last point is put obstacles in the way of messing up. No one who's messed up that I know of and had conversations with subsequent to their messing up was glad they did, didn't regret that they had, and didn't wish that they'd put some things in play which would have prevented it. The Bible places high standards on leaders' moral conduct. As, for example, John mentioned yesterday in his letter to Titus, we should be beyond reproach. We should be blameless. What the ESV, the English Standard Version, translates as above reproach is a legal word that indicates a kind of innocence in the eyes of the law. It means that no one can legitimately rebuke you or make any charge against you that will ultimately stick. They may accuse, but your conduct will eventually acquit you. So we must hold ourselves to that standard. And a helpful tool that many of you will already have in place is putting boundaries in place around certain behaviors to create obstacles which get in the way of messing up. For example, the handling of money is an important issue in our time. And there are some simple boundaries that are fairly easy to implement. The Bible gives helpful advice on how to be accountable for the church's finances. For instance, those working with the finances should be trustworthy people. Never handle money alone, so there's an accountability. I personally don't handle money. So if a church member says, oh, excuse me, I missed the offering, can I just give you this to pass on? I'll say, no. Can I direct you to someone at the information desk who could actually take that, put it in an envelope in front of somebody else, and it'll be passed on through the safe and it'll get to the finance department. So simply no, I don't handle money. And have someone like a trustee sign off on all your expenses, someone robust enough to ask you about an expense if they feel the need to. This is particularly for pastors using church money. But, like whining and dining in the best restaurants and just some expense accounts going through and no one robust enough to say, hold on a minute, that's inappropriate. So, our chair of trustees, who signs off all my expenses in the movement and historically did in the church, I'd be totally accountable to every penny I've spent, every glass of wine I've ever bought, over dinner, all those things. It needs to be appropriate. And have a policy in place which requires you to disclose gifts over a certain size to the trustees or someone who oversees you. Because if you've got church members funding your children's education privately or buying you a new car every 3 years, you're going to find your pastoral relationship with that person is very, very compromised. And also it just doesn't look good. The optics are terrible. The area of the opposite sex is also one where healthy boundaries are vital. None of us is immune to messing up. And if we think we are, we may be more at risk still. Okay? Male and female alike. The enemy loves to put sexual temptation in the path of those leading in the church. I wrote a list of all the people I knew personally, had conversed with, or were friends, who had blown themselves out of pastoral ministry. I think many, many years ago it got to about 34. And then I stopped listing them, and it's now gone, it's probably double that, okay? People who I've been in ministry with in some context or other, and 95% of them blew out because of sexual immorality. So none of us is immune. Now, you may be familiar with the Billy Graham rule, which suggests restrictions for married leaders regarding spending time with a woman other than their wife alone. It doesn't apply to single people, but if one of them is married. So it has been criticized. It has valid reasons applied to those criticisms, not least that it assumes, first of all, the leader is male. It assumes that they're heterosexual. And it may restrict career advancement opportunities for women, because if the leader is a male, a woman can't get mentored by them and all that sort of thing. So it's also been criticized for its implicit suggestion that people can't be trusted to control themselves. So can I not have coffee with this woman because, she's a temptress and I'm completely... No, these are called guidelines, because if you put these things in place, it's an awful lot safer than if you don't. So whether you're inclined to adopt it or reject it, my own view is that whether you are male or female, there is wisdom in taking the principles seriously. Interpret it into your situation. And these are helpful tips. So whether you're male or female, or if you are married, or if the other person is married, okay, and interpret it as it relates to sexual attraction. But never counsel a member of the opposite sex or have other intimate conversations. Never go out for a coffee or a meal with someone of the opposite sex alone. If you need to meet alone, perhaps because you work together, do so in a public, accountable place. I might work with my assistant sometimes. We have glass panels in all the doors in the main warehouse. I would never meet with her anywhere other than that. Or I would always have Debbie with me or somebody else with me. Rarely travel with a member of the opposite sex. And if you have to, because it may just make sense, because you've got to get to this event or something like that, tell someone else in advance. Let somebody else know in advance. It covers you for misaccusation, like, oh, I saw John Wright driving through town the other day with a beautiful woman. Wonder what's going on there. Yeah, that was my daughter-in-law, and I'd already, that was accountable to Debbie. Or that was a colleague, yes, but because we had to make that trip, I had already told my colleague that we would be doing that. So it's completely in the open and accountable. I love the app called Find My, which works on my iPhone, and there are similar apps available. I don't know whether you can access that if you have some other type of phone. I won't comment on phones right now. But it enables your spouse and family to see where you are, at least where your phone is, at any given moment. So if I go to Find My, Debbie is currently... Well, a couple of minutes. Oh, she's 672 miles away. She's in the departure lounge of Manchester Airport. She's about to fly to Columbus, Ohio. I know where she is right now, and she could know where I am if she chose to look at that. So it enables people like your spouse and family, I've got adult children, they are on here as well, to see where my phone is, at least, if not me. And it would be very hard, wouldn't it, to get into an inappropriate relationship and visit a person's home or be in a restaurant or a bar or in a hotel where I shouldn't be when there's that level of accountability right there. And whenever I leave the house, I always let Debbie know where I'm going. We know where sometimes I go away for 3 days on my motorcycle, but she knows exactly where I am. And I said, you can always find me, just click on the Find My app. Total accountability. And some of you may say, phew, technology, this is like Big Brothers, 1984, on steroids, isn't it? But do I really want... Well, there's only one occasion your spouse shouldn't know where you are, and that's when you're visiting a very fine jewelry shop to buy her a special gift. And on that occasion... leave your phone with a mate, or tell someone, I'm going to turn my phone off or leave it at home while I do this, but I'm going to a jewelry shop for my wife, so if ever she says, where was I, you'll know. I'd encourage you to think about this. Download that app before you leave this conference, I would encourage you. And if you're wrestling with I don't like that, prayerfully consider why you don't. I don't think you should be anywhere you're not willing to be accountable to be, especially with those close to you. And if that's an issue, wrestle that out with the Lord. Essentially, live so accountably that it's almost impossible to begin an illicit relationship. I've talked about money and relationships with the opposite sex because these seem to be particularly challenging, but the principle of putting obstacles in place could and should be applied to any area that we might find to be a challenge, like gossip or drinking or pornography or whatever is difficult for you. Consider what boundaries you need and stick to them. And you might even want to share these with others to help hold you accountable. Leadership is tough, as I began at the beginning. It can be overwhelmingly difficult sometimes and challenging and so on. In October last year, Debbie and I handed on the leadership of Trent Vineyard to our successor, John Bodley, so that we can devote ourselves more fully to leading the movement in the UK and Ireland. And like many significant moments in life, we've found ourselves reflecting on the past 37 years in leadership. There have been exciting seasons, devastating seasons, challenging and stretching experiences, extraordinary breakthrough moments, seasons of abundant harvest, and occasionally, like the Apostle Paul, we have felt under great pressure far beyond our ability to endure. If with hindsight, we were offered the opportunity to have spent our best years doing something else, the honest truth is that we would, without a doubt, have chosen what God chose for us. The church is precious. And whatever level you are leading at, we are all entrusted by God to nurture and care for it. And it's probably true to say that alongside Jesus building his church, the future of the church depends significantly on those entrusted with leadership. Every church here is represented, every church represented here is full of gifted, talented, willing people, all that potential to impact the world, to be leveraged, encouraged, and developed by leaders. So whatever capacity you are leading in, every leader would do well to make it a priority to keep watch over themselves, to put the structures and habits in place to give ourselves the very best chance of leading healthily and well and long term. I don't know of any leader I've messed up who didn't regret having done so. If we imagined what it would be like in years to come, if we did something which disqualified us from leadership, we can project that back to affect our actions this week. It's worth considering what the decisions we make today affect how things will likely turn out many years from now. If I'm not careful to treat people well, what damage could that do to them and to the church and to my ministry or my career? If I burn out, what damage would that do to the church and others around me? If I fell into serious sin, what damage would that do to me, the church, my loved ones, and so on? If I'm at risk, I need to take whatever action is necessary to address the issues. And for each of you, there'll be different aspects of the things that I've touched on in this session which perhaps have particularly resonated with you. And I really would encourage you to take time to reflect on them. Perhaps share them with someone you're here with and just pay, what to pay attention to might be the application from this session. Shall we stand? We're going to coffee, but let's just pray before we do. Lord, we thank you wherever we've been entrusted with leadership in the secular world, in the church world. We're all playing roles in church. And we thank you, Lord, for the incredible privilege that is. When we feel jaded and even cynical and hurting, we ask, Lord, you'd lift our eyes to the church which you purchased with your blood. And with these various things, Lord, there'll be different places which different points have touched in lives present here. Let's just take 2 minutes of silence. We're not going to have a ministry time, we're going to coffee, but just 2 minutes of silence. Just ask the Lord, is there something you want me to implement in this coming week that would change my ministry and my life? Come, Lord, we know that you would speak. We thank you, Lord, that you care intimately about each of our lives, each of our ministries, the people that you've entrusted to our care. And as we go from here, if there are any grains of wisdom that you would want to just water and grow, we ask, Lord, in these coming days that you would not let us walk away from the session just forgetting instantly, but you would nag us about something perhaps to bring about change for the better.